Okay. Well, it looks like it's recording, so I guess we'll find out. Alright, so very first video using a new phone and learning how to figure out how to upload this to YouTube. This is going to be quite the learning curve to figure out this new technology. So, guess I would start with some of the basics. And with a lot of Lakota beadwork, especially the large beadwork, beadwork that covers large spaces, particularly moccasins, leggings, dresses, regalia, involves a lot of the lane stitch, and that's what this is. I'm working on a pair of baby booties here. Severely late holiday order right now that I am working on completing now that I finally got more of these blue beads in stock. I ran out. And then my resupply order got lost in the mail. Yeah, holiday delivery system is going whack on us. But the blue beads are finally here now, so I'm going crazy trying to get these done and sent out. And I thought it would still be a good time to demonstrate the lane stitch. You may have also heard it under different names. A common one that I see in a lot of beading books is the lazy stitch, and we are trying to get away from that because a lot of people don't like that term. It's kind of, well, in my view, is slightly derogatory, because if you've ever sat and watched a native lady or an elder or someone, you know, beading a regalia outfit in this lane stitch, the amount of space and time and energy and skill that it takes to do this consistently over such a large item is pretty impressive. So this whole idea of calling it the lazy stitch is just like a total nah for me. So more and more people are calling it the lane stitch, which is an apt description for it. You draw two lines, maybe lay down tape or just some pencil marks or something, and then you bead in a lane or a row like this. And when you bead, particularly on buckskin, you don't want your needle to go all the way through the buckskin. As you can see here, you can see the little, where it changes, where the edge of the beadwork is. Right there. Whoops. Shift phone. Adjust. Not adjusting. Okay, not liking the light very much. I gotta adjust that. But you can't see the stitch, the thread, through the back of the leather. And that's actually intentional. That's the way you're supposed to do lane stitch, because especially on clothing, moccasins, things that are going to get worn and used, it protects the thread from getting worn out and breaking, and then you lose all your beads. On cloth, you're not able to do that. Cloth, you stick your needle through and it's through, and that's it. So some people will like back the cloth with other stuff and whatnot to protect your stitching. But on leather, you don't need to do that because it's thick enough. You can only put your needle halfway through. And I'll see. This will be interesting, trying to bead on camera. See if I can show you how that's done. Good first practice video for me. So, see that you have your thread. Always use a doubled thread when doing lane stitch because you need that extra oomph to hold the beads, especially on garments that are going to be used and worn. You want a doubled thread right there in order to keep hold of the beads to prevent it from breaking so easily. So what we do, let's see, blue bead, we need another blue. So we're gonna pick up the number of beads we need. I typically do a lane of 7 because an odd number works with most patterns and designs easily. Most things are odd numbered, and 7 is like a really easy stitch to do. So what we're going to do is we put our needle into the thread, or into the buckskin, roughly half a bead's width over from the last stitch. So, I mean, sometimes you need more, you need less, depends. Whoa. Don't know what that was. depending on what you're working on, if you're doing a straight lane or if you're turning. My phone is having an aneurysm. So like the toe here, it was tight at the top and wide at the bottom. In order to... Oh, this phone is going to drive me nuts. I need to turn off notifications when I do this. Note to self. Yeah, so that's how you turn. But here, we're more straight, so we need to keep the stitches even. So what we're going to do, see if we can see it here. You can barely see my needle. So what we're going to do, kind of stick the end of the needle in right there, and then you bubble the leather over your finger so that you don't go all the way through the leather. If you feel the needle scrape your finger, that means you've gone too deep. You don't want to sew your finger to the back of the project. I have done that. It's not fun. So it's kind of an indicator, especially when you're working with buckskin, that if you felt the needle at all, you've gone too deep. But what you do is you bubble your buckskin over your needle. Come on, phone. Adjust the light a bit. So the needle's kind of right there where it's puckered, but as you can see, it didn't go all the way through. And that's what we want. So I'm going to pop this guy through. Yeah. Hang on a moment. I've got a lot of thread to pull through. Lots and lots of thread. Sometimes I keep my finger kind of on this loop right here where the thread went through in order to keep it from twisting up and knotting on me. That's where you'll get the tangles, especially if it was a really tight stitch through like tough hide. That tightness will cause any twisting or bunching in the thread to bunch up even further, and you'll end up in the last 5 or 6 inches or so before you're done pulling through, you'll end up with a massive rat's nest of thread that you'll have to untangle. So it's good to kind of keep your finger on top of it to keep the loop from flipping around all over the place, and therefore minimize your chance of ending up with a huge tangle. So you can see how it's spaced nicely, like so, nice and straight with a little bit of dog hair thrown in. Yeah, I've got a pug, and I have never known a small dog to shed so much in their life. Like, wow. And her fur is everywhere, and it's a daily chore to keep up with it. So do not be surprised at all if in future videos you see dog hair all over the place. It's my lovely little puggy leaving her mark all over the house. Yes, I'm talking about you. Hi. She's over here trying to figure out who it is I'm talking to, because it's not her. Or at least it wasn't for a moment. So we'll get, let's see, we need a third blue stitch. So we're gonna pick up 7 more of these. That seems rather thick, but sometimes you have to kind of sort which beads you're going to use in a stitch, because if one stitch you had a lot of thin beads, it's a short stitch, and then the next stitch is a lot of thick beads, and then you don't have this even width of a row. But of course some seed beads, particularly like certain colors of preciosa and whatnot, they're really irregular beads, all sorts of different sizes, so you just kind of have to go through stitch by stitch and sort the sizes to get a good even row as you work. It's just a thing with seed beads, really, especially the old traditional seed bead colors. They were like that. I mean, when you look at pieces in museums, in order to keep a lane of lane stitch even, one stitch might have 9 beads and then the next stitch might have 11. It was all over the place, but they adjusted the number of beads per stitch based on whether they were thick or shaved really thin in order to keep an even width of a row as they went. So it's not at all uncommon. These, for the baby booties that I make, are size 15 Rokyle. Most of the colors are very consistent. The sizes of the beads are very consistent, and so I can keep the same number of beads per stitch fairly easily. I think these rainbow white, transparent rainbow white right here at the end of my thumb, they're about the most inconsistent color I've got on here right now. And so I have to watch them a little bit, but for the most part, Rokyles are very nice and tiny and consistent, and they're great for the fine detail work, but also for like making baby booties. So these are like, what size are these? I think these are size 4. Shoe size 4, so like the sole of the moccasin baby booty is only going to be like 3 or 4 inches at most. So, yeah. So that's how the lane stitch works. Mostly it's very much a stitch of labor. It takes a lot of time to cover a considerable amount of space. But when you've just done it for a while and you start to get consistent and be able to eye how far apart your stitches are going to be and how to keep your rows straight, it's just beautiful how it turns out. It's just something you have to keep on doing until you build that feeling of consistency. Really, that's the key to lane stitch, is consistency, and it just takes time to do it. You know, you've just got to sit there for a couple hours at a time and just do it until you start to build that feeling. You know, you just kind of know. And if that means you have to go back to the beginning couple of rows that you did and tear them out and redo them because they're no longer, you know, they were your first rows, so they were inconsistent, and you needed them to look better in order to match the better work that you've done now, then, you know, so be it. I've done that a time or two. My first cradle board I ever made seemed like every time I sat down and started beading on it, the first 10 minutes of beading was just all over the place. And I would build some consistency, get a good rhythm, and it would look good. And I'd have to go back to that first 10 minutes worth of beadwork and rip it out and do it over because it just did not match anymore. I mean, you could sit there and tell all the spots where I had stopped and started because the starting point was just all over the place. So that's always a possibility, but it's going to make your beadwork look so much better. You know, that attention to detail and that pushing yourself to do it better. You know, don't settle for work that's kind of haphazard when you know you can do better, because that's how you'll kind of make a name for your work. That's how you'll get a reputation for your beadwork, is making really good quality, consistent work. So, and that's what the lane stitch is known for. Good, consistent. Honestly, I find sharp turns like this the hardest part, because if I turn too fast and then it kind of shows and it looks weird because I have to pull it back. So doing a good consistent turn is probably the trickiest part of all, but I've done a few old style rosettes recently, so I was able to do that fairly well. So yeah, those are the basics of lane stitch, you know. Getting the stitches good and not going through the back of your leather to your finger. That's very bad. Don't sew your finger to the back of your work. First rule of beading. So, I will see now what the procedure is to attempt to load this on YouTube, I guess. Step number 2 in the new tech class for me. So, thanks for watching, and there'll be more coming as I figure this out.